Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Tonight, we are really excited to have Tove Danovich here. She is the author of Under the Henfluence, and I heard about this book coming out several months ago, and we've been very excited in our office ever since. Two of the booksellers in our bookstore at Vintage own chickens, so we've been very excited to to sort of circle around and snatch her up as soon as it was close to the book coming out and say, hey, you have to come and talk to us. But I'm going to start with a question that I start with almost every time, and that is, can you tell us the sort of birth story of this book? How did the book come to be?
Yeah, by accident mostly. I got chickens like a lot of people do, intending to just have a source of eggs that were in the backyard. They were going to kind of like pay rent in exchange for giving me their eggs, and be a very, formal relationship. And I got them as day-old chicks, and because I am a journalist, I have been for over a decade. I really love the research side of my work. And so, of course, I was preparing to have an animal I'd never had before. So I was taking out every book that the library had to offer. Um, sorry. And there are a million how-to guides, but there wasn't really anything that seemed to go deeper in our relationship
Mhm.
with chickens. And the more time I spent with the flock, the more time I spent getting to know them and, seeing all these funny little chick behaviors they have. I just really felt like there wasn't a book out there that talked about who chickens were and our relationship with them, and kind of had some of this history too. And I love reading animal books, and there's so many books like that about, octopus, and a million books about wolves, like
Yeah,
dogs, cats,
yeah.
they all get a book, but chickens didn't have a book. So I was like, I guess I have to write it. So yeah, I started out to write the book that I really wanted to read, and only 5 years or so later,
Yeah,
here I am.
that would
So
always work.
yeah, that's
So
what
where
happened.
did you start? Like when you decided, okay, I'm going to write this book, did you kind of just sit down and say, These are all the things that I want to know about," and or
It's been
where was
so
your
long.
gateway?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was something I was thinking about for a while before it happened. And I had tried to write books before, and for a nonfiction book, you have to write this book
Yeah.
proposal. So that means it's very formulaic, but there are some sample chapters you have to write. And more importantly, you have to list out every single chapter you think is going to be in the book, but with only having somewhat researched it.
Yeah.
So that process took a really long time. And I had a document with just notes from every book I could find, where I was like, this is an interesting bit of history. Like, here's a place where maybe I could go. These people are doing something interesting with chickens. And just kind of had this mess of, hundreds of pages of notes that eventually I sorted through. And my very first reporting trip that I did was to this chicken training camp in Washington State, where people were clicker training chickens to do tricks. And this was before I
I
sold the
love
book.
that.
So I was like, this is interesting enough. Maybe I can sell this somewhere else as like a magazine piece if
Yeah.
no one buys the book. But that's always really difficult, to be like, I'm this person doing this project that may or may not
Yeah.
ever see
Yeah.
the light of day.
Exactly.
And this was, 4 years ago, I think, that I went there, and the book is finally out now, and they,
Yeah.
they get to
Yeah.
see it. But yeah, basically just a mess of things I sorted through. But because I was taking so many pictures of the chickens, which soon became their own Instagram account that the chickens had, which now is very popular. But there were a lot of notes about chickens and videos and things that they were doing and what happened when in the flock. And that became actually a really helpful resource to look through again when I was in the
Yeah.
research
Yeah.
process, where I could be like, oh, when exactly did this thing happen? Can I revisit what it looked like when the chicken do their, worm football, where they all run after each other cheeping because one has like the good grub, and
Oh,
they
yeah.
all announce it and run after each other. So yeah, those things just all somehow came together.
Yeah. Yeah. So was there what are some of, so if you had hundreds of pages of notes, which I'm sure you did, and
Hmm.
more importantly, like topics that you have to gather. I'm a nonfiction writer too, so I've had to do
Okay.
proposals, and
Yeah.
yes, you're like, oh, sure, I can write a whole chapter about this. It's no problem. And then you
Yeah.
discover there's not enough or whatever. And were there one or more topics or stories that you really wanted to tell because the story was so interesting or the topic was so interesting,
Mm.
but that had to not eventually make it into the final book, just maybe because there wasn't quite enough material or there weren't enough
Mhm.
sources that,
I'm sure there were. I started this newsletter that, because all journalists are starting newsletters these days. That's
yeah,
also
yeah,
called Under the Henfluence, and it's just once a month. And that kind of became a repository for a lot of those things. One of my favorite stories that I wrote for that was about this woman, Nancy Luce, on the East Coast, who wrote like a book of poems just dedicated to her chickens. And she was kind of this recluse that had a bit of a sad life, but she really loved her little hens and kind of became locally famous, at least because of her love of chickens. And so I did, a short kind of profile on the history of her. Did something about people trying to take chickens into space. So I think a lot of those things that, definitely would not have been a fit for the book. I didn't
yeah,
feel
yeah,
like they got left on the cutting room floor, because I knew immediately like they weren't part of the proposal, so they were
yeah,
never going to be
yeah,
part of the book. But as I learned more about them, I was like, great, I can write 800 words about them for this newsletter, and
yeah,
that's
yeah,
perfect.
yeah, that's awesome. So I have to admit, I was a little bit jealous when I was looking through the book and also when I heard your interview on the takeaway because you got to go to Murray McMurray Hatchery.
Hmm.
I ordered my chicks for
Mm.
4-H from Murray McMurray Hatchery.
Wow.
So I was like, oh, so can you tell us just a little bit about what the actual modern hatchery is like being there? Because of course, I have when I was younger, it was a paper catalog, and now
Hmm.
you go on an online catalog, but you see all the cute baby chickens, and maybe you see a couple sort of curated photos of them like sorting or whatever. But I'd
Hmm.
just really be curious about the experience of actually being there and what it was like in that
Yeah, I
space.
was so lucky that I mean, they're amazing. I've interviewed them for a couple of articles too that I've done because I just know like they always give me such great, honest information, which is
Yeah, yeah.
very hard to find in
Yes, yeah,
agriculture these
yeah.
days. Um, yeah, so you go in and there's this front office that looks like every other front office you've ever been to, except for all the pictures of chickens on the wall. And then, if you arrive on the day when all of the chickens are hatching and getting ready to go off to their homes, as soon as you open this biosecurity door, there is just this cacophony of peeping
Oh,
everywhere. And it
wow. Yeah,
doesn't
I didn't
smell
even think
great
about that. Yeah, I
because
would think
there have
not.
been, yeah, like thousands of eggs incubating. Not all of them are fertilized. So it's
Yeah,
really, it's
so
this
some of them are,
multi-sensory
yeah,
experience. Um, and a lot of it is very sweet because, I also got my first chicks in the mail. It's hard not to think about like all the people that are eagerly awaiting these birds
yeah,
at home, and they're being sorted and sent off to their new lives, and that's all really lovely. And you see the people trying to sex chickens, which is something
mhm,
I knew the
yeah,
history of, but
yeah,
seeing it and trying to do it and failing to do it, as I talk
yeah.
about in the book,
I
it is,
can't even imagine because it's, yeah,
yeah, I'm like, I'm hallucinating. I don't know what you're looking at. You have to pry open their vents, only works on the first day, and look to see if there's like a tiny, tiny little bump inside or not for people who haven't read the book yet. And it's
yeah, yeah,
impossible. And yet some people are doing this 8 hours a day for their job,
yeah,
which is
yeah.
mind-blowing.
And relatively accurate, which is just
Yeah.
astonishing. Like when I got my girls a year ago, I got 8, no, 9,
Hmm.
and they're all hens.
That's
I
right.
didn't get an
Yeah.
oops, and I'm
Yeah.
just like, that is really kind of amazing, actually, when you think about it.
Yeah, it's wild. So, there is that side which is really lovely, but then there is the side that like they
Yeah.
are an industrial hatchery. They're selling mostly egg layers, and people don't want roosters or people only want certain breeds of chickens. And so you do have a lot of that loss of life, which I knew going into it. It is difficult to see,
Yeah.
it's a part where it's not any better than the egg industry where you also get that, but it is on a smaller scale. And
Yeah. Yeah.
that's something I still really struggle with a lot when it comes to what to do with my own flock, because I do think these birds have much better lives in our backyards. I think most of us don't know them. Certainly when you're doing something like having an Instagram account with like 115,000 followers, like I have now, they get to be spokeshens for
Yeah.
all of the
Yeah.
rest of their species, and I think that that is really valuable. And to show people that chickens are more than like the little red hen everyone is used to
Yeah.
seeing. They come in all these like
Yeah.
shapes and
Yeah.
sizes, and can maybe win people over with the fact that they are like cute
Yeah.
and sweet and have bell bottoms. But yeah, it is an industry that
Yeah.
depends
Yeah.
on commerce and animals finding homes and doing jobs like laying
Yeah.
eggs. And so that side, um, is a tough reality, and it's something I wanted to be really forthright about too, because I think
Yeah.
you get, not a lot of people talk about it that are in like the backyard chicken community.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
kind of a thing we don't really want to look at. And then you have people that are very pro animal rights where that's all they look at. And so I really wanted to do something that kind of took a mid ground of like, let's be very honest about the good and the bad of what
Yeah.
what is
Yeah.
happening here.
Let's switch to your girls
Hmm.
because I saw the picture. I think it's in the book, the picture that you of the box that your girls
Yeah.
came in.
Hmm.
And I believe you still have Peggy.
I do. Yeah.
So tell us about Peggy.
Good old Peggy. Yeah, it was just my fifth chicken anniversary yesterday, I think.
Yeah.
So when I got her, and it was her fifth hatch day, 2 days before that. So she came along with two others. They were all named after Mad Men characters, but the other two are not with me anymore. So there's just Peggy. She is a large gray olive egger with a beard. I didn't know until I got her that I would become just obsessed with chickens that have beards, but that it really speaks to me. I love a chicken
Yeah.
with a
Yeah.
beard. They're very silly and yet deeply distinguished. Um, but yeah, Peggy, from the beginning, she was clearly like the boss of the three.
Yeah.
She was the
Yeah.
first to do things, maybe not the smartest of the bunch, but the most like willing to be brave and go out on a limb and try
Yeah.
things out. And today she's, the oldest hen in my flock, and she's very much the head hen. And I just love whenever a fight breaks out among the two of them, she will rush over from wherever she is and like put her body in between the fighting hens. And usually that's enough to just stop.
Interesting. Yeah.
But if one of them tries to start it again, she goes to the one that starts it and then gives them a couple of pecks and runs them off. And I just love the way that she keeps the peace. I don't know that
Yeah.
like all head hens are that
Yeah,
way.
I was gonna say no, mine doesn't really do that. She's a
Yeah,
little bit more aloof and but
she's
yeah.
fantastic. And I think that's one of the things where, a lot of people, if you only keep hens for egg laying, like there is turnover every year and a half to maybe 2.5 years if you're really letting it go a little bit longer. But I think having a cohesive flock, you really see how their personalities develop over
Yeah.
time and
Yeah.
how their relationships develop over time. My flock has been relatively stable for the most part. I've had like a couple additions as I've lost some, to various like diseases and things.
Yeah.
But yeah, you really just see them come into their own because that wasn't something she did a few years ago, but now it's very consistent.
Yeah. Oh, that's
Um,
funny.
yeah, it's great. So Peggy is a
Yeah,
delight.
I was gonna say like I've had mine now a year And what I find really fascinating is having them from little guys all the way up, that their personalities when they were real tiny
Hmm.
are their
Yeah.
personalities now. The one I had to take to the vet yesterday is the my bottom of the pecking order
Okay.
girl. And she's always been the timid one that's kind of in the back of the corner and not engaging and hanging back,
Hmm.
even when I first brought her home. So I love that their little personalities are very distinct and very them for their whole lives. And
Yeah.
so you have another chicken that is sounds like she's much more of a troublemaker, Emmy Lou, who I love because she's got the feathered feet and she's just
Yes.
adorable.
Hmm.
So what is the craziest situation that she's gotten herself into?
Emmylou. Yeah, it's definitely when she flew up on the roof the one time. We have, a two-story house, and I was just out taking pictures of her. She was a little younger and lighter, so I don't think she could pull this off, which I'm not upset about. But I just saw her doing this little thing where she's kind of like looking up and doing these kind of practice hops. But I didn't think anything of it, and all of a sudden she's taking off and going over my head and landing on the roof above me. And I was like, oh no, how will I ever get this chicken down? We have a very pointy roof. And I was like, if I climb up there and she climbs farther, this is going to be a problem. I'm just going to try and wait for her to come down. And I did. And, some time passes, some more time passes. It's like an hour has gone by. It's now starting to rain. I'm like, oh, this is really not good. And she luckily decided to fly down on her own, but really gave me quite a panic. But yeah, she's gotten into all kinds of trouble. A hawk tried to get her, and we couldn't find her for a while. And I kept thinking that I was just like hallucinating hearing her because we found a pile of her feathers and we found all the other chickens, but we just could not find Emmylou. Um, and she's small enough. I was like, the hawk probably carried her away. Like, this is the end of Emmylou. How do I tell the internet this is horrible?
Oh
Just a horrible
no.
situation. I don't like anything about this. And every time I was about to go inside, I heard this little like sound. It was like, that just sounds like Emmylou's voice. I don't know what's happening. And finally, just as I was about to give up, my husband checked the compost bin that's right next to the garage and just decided to move it to the side and peek behind it. And there was a little space, like literally this big, that she had shoved herself into and was just in there hiding. And it had been her that I was hearing the whole
Oh,
time. And we were so happy. But yeah, I
yay.
really thought I'd lost her. But good job, Emmylou.
Yeah, they're pretty sharp getting away. So,
Mm-hmm.
so one of the other things that you talk about, one of the other chapters in the book is about people that show chickens.
Mm-hmm.
And can you talk about that experience a little bit? And also just as a tack on to that, because there are so many really interesting breeds, can you talk about some of the rarer, more interesting breeds that you met when you were working on that story?
Yeah, I got to go to the Ohio National Poultry Show, which happens once a year in November, and it is the largest poultry show in the United States. And it is a delight if you love chickens and ducks and geese. They had turkeys. I think it was the year of the turkey, the year that I went.
Oh,
So there
but
were a particularly large number of turkeys. And I was there for the whole weekend, just kind of walking around, other than a couple of people that I had spoken with ahead of time and knew I was going to be talking with them. Um, and yeah, if you don't think you can look at chickens for 8 hours at a time, you have not been a chicken person at the Ohio National Poultry Show
yeah,
because I was
yeah,
just enthralled constantly. And even breeds that I thought I knew, like the salmon favrel, which I've had
yeah,
one,
yeah,
they had them in other colors, and I had only
yeah,
ever seen
yeah.
them come in salmon. Who knew? And I think some of my favorites were actually the modern game chickens. I've become
Mm.
really fascinated by. They're kind of like the greyhounds of the chicken world. They're very thin. They stand a little bit more upright
Yeah.
because they are after the kind of traditional like cockfighting silhouette.
Yeah.
Their
Yeah.
combs and wattles are taken off, which gives them this very kind of sleek, like reptilian appearance
Yeah.
almost. And they come in these beautiful colors too. And just seeing them in their cages, they seem much more dignified
Yeah.
than the other chickens, because they're not, they don't have the fluffy butts like everyone else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but it's one thing to know that there are like hundreds of varieties of chickens when you look at size and color variation, and it's another to see a lot of them in
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
And if you go on these hatchery websites or look at the catalogs, that seems like a lot of chickens, but that is still a very small percentage of
Yeah.
what is out there, because a lot of these are just not popular enough commercially to have
Yeah.
large breeds, or they don't breed well enough to make that easy to do in a commercial setting. But that was really wonderful to get to go there and then tie it into the history of the hen fever, which was a time in Victorian England, and then that crossed over to America, where we all got really obsessed with chickens, and chicken prices skyrocketed to even way above what you would think is, a crazy amount to spend for a chicken today.
Yeah.
Like $300 for a pair of chickens back in the 1800s is
Oh,
just
wow.
shocking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What were you able to meet some of the people who are working to preserve the heritage breeds?
I didn't as much. And that is something I don't talk about too much in the book. I think, yeah, I would really like to write more about chicken genetics. It's not something I really talked about a lot. Just the fact that, the commercial breeds are very inbred. In the
Yes.
broilers, it's something like they share 30% of their DNA.
Yeah.
But in laying hens, I was reading recently, it's like 90%, which is
Oh, wow.
really
And you're
alarming.
talking about the
This
commercial,
is
like
the
Leghorn.
commercial. Yeah. And that is not great for for disease
No,
spread.
no.
I think some people have at least heard of the fact that like bananas, the kind that we get, the Cavendish,
Yeah.
are clones of each other. And because of that, like there are these diseases that are really problematic and maybe going to
Yeah.
kill off all the bananas. And climate change is also a problem
Right.
when
Right.
everything is happiest in this narrow window. So having genetic diversity is very important. Um, that said, I have somewhat complicated feelings about preserving the genetics of breeds that are human creations. I think
Yeah. Yeah.
genetic diversity as a thing is really wonderful, but does it matter to preserve a this one specific heritage breed of genetics of something that
Yeah.
we created in the 1900s specifically? I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Oh, that's an interesting conversation to have because
yeah.
it's one thing to try to preserve, like a wild species
Mhm.
that has some unique, well, just for its own sake, but also that has some unique genetic structures. But yeah, I mean, you are you are talking about a breed that was human created
Yeah.
and I think it's interesting though that there's fewer like mutts of the chicken world. I think once you get like a backyard flock where you maybe
Mhm.
have one rooster and a bunch of hens of different breeds, then you're going to have that happen. But all the breeding, all the hatcheries and everything are all
Yeah. I
up
mean,
here
a lot
though.
of the
So
olive egg or Easter egger, those are essentially
yes, that's true.
mutts.
Yeah, yeah,
And you do still have some of they're known as the landrace breeds. Like I think the Swedish flower hen at least was traditionally, where rather than a breed, and this is very similar to what we used to do with dogs as well, you would have, say a small village in Italy, and they bred the chickens that did the best in the like climate with the food available to this small village in Italy. So you would have, this village's chickens, and those are usually referred to as a land race. Some
uh,
of those they still have a variation that are available through
yeah,
hatcheries,
yeah.
but I don't know how well you can continue that once
That's
they're taken out
interesting.
of the
Yeah, when it
environment. But
inherently wasn't a breed to begin with.
mhm.
That was kind of the point.
Yeah, they were a type, which, is much healthier and I think a better way of maintaining that diversity
Yeah.
because once you
Yeah.
have a breed, usually you think of something like purebred, where now the genetics are always going to get
Right.
smaller
Right.
over time.
Well, and you get situations where people are breeding for certain things and then they start having health problems and that kind of thing.
Exactly. And I think that is not as much of a problem with chickens. I know even for show, some people when they're trying to get certain attributes in their chicken of X breed, they will actually crossbreed in something of another breed, and that is
Interesting.
allowed in chickens, which is not allowed
Not
with like
about another.
purebred dogs
Yeah,
and their
yeah.
registries and all of that.
That's fascinating. Well, and I think the other thing that is interesting are uh they're not really breeds per se, but are the varieties like the olive Ager.
Hmm.
I have an olive Ager, and they're like for those of you who aren't aware, they're a chicken that has been bred to try to get an olive green egg. Um, but they've been bred with sometimes like the Morans and like blue species that lay blue
Yeah.
eggs and species that lay brown eggs. So basically you're trying to cross blue and brown and try to get a nice dark green egg. And because it's not a breed that breeds true all the time, you're not always going to get that. Mine
Hmm.
happens to actually lay olive green eggs,
Yeah.
but you don't know if you're going to get that.
Hmm.
And then of course all the versions of the Easter eggers are
Hmm.
different.
Yeah.
I have a one chicken called a Mystic Onyx that's the
Mm.
has the black skin
Mhm.
and the black feathers. And I think they're the kind of the same too. I don't know that they're actually a breed or if they're trying
Yeah.
to because there is a breed that is pure black, and I don't know if the Mystic Onyx is a version of that that's been bred to other chickens,
Yeah.
but it is fun to see people play around with that. It's a lot
Hmm.
easier to play around with chicken genetics than it is to
Yeah.
say like a dog or a cat, and
Yeah.
uh,
For sure.
so um let's see. What I guess it's something that I think is always interesting to think about, and I know we have a few people on that said they were chicken lovers, and
Mhm.
we'll put this up to YouTube, and I'm sure there'll be more people watching it that are
Mhm.
chicken lovers. What would you want people to know if they don't have chickens, but they're thinking of getting them?
Mm. Mhm.
So that they can go into it with like the joy and excitement and fun that it is to have them, but also kind of be aware of things that they need to maybe be aware of or prepare for or whatever.
Yeah, I think the most important thing you can do is having a really good predator-proof coop. I think really makes or breaks your chicken keeping experience because everything wants to eat chickens.
Yeah, yeah,
And when I started, I had done enough research to be familiar with that, so I thought a lot about, like raccoons, dogs, things that are in our area, but I didn't think about things like rats. So having, the galvanized wire that actually rats can't get through that you bury all the way under your coop, which we've now done on coop number two, which hopefully will make that a little bit easier. But
yeah, yeah,
things like that, or having a movable coop if you don't want to deal with that, that will make your chicken keeping journey just so much nicer. All the preparation really makes such a big difference, and I think unfortunately, people aren't prepared. They don't know what they don't know. So
yeah,
that's the part that tends to not happen as well. Um, but yeah, you want to keep your chicken safe. You want to keep your chores kind of as easy as possible. And so
yes.
having that set up really makes
Yeah,
a big
yeah,
difference. And I think also thinking about what are you going to do when you go out of town? Do you have neighbors that are going to be able to care for them? Do you have a system that like really will be able to keep them fed and watered for 2 or 3 days, but not for like 10? How are you going to deal with
yeah,
all of
yeah.
that? So I think those are all good. Chicken mouth is very real. and new people may or may not be familiar with this phenomenon, but it's where you think you're getting three chickens, which is what I started with, and then suddenly you have eight of them.
Yes.
So if you
Yes.
get the coop that is really great for 3 to 4 chickens, but absolutely is not like a healthy, fun environment for more than that, you are going to be really sad pretty
Yeah.
soon when suddenly you find yourself wanting to expand your
Yeah.
flock. So I think bigger is always great. And even if you never fill it, it just means it doesn't get as dirty as fast. And like the
Yes.
chickens are
Yeah.
happy with more space. So those are probably the bigger things. But that said, there are so many amazing how-to books out there. You can read my book. You can read a lot of. I
Mhm.
actually really like the Chicken Keeping for Dummies is one of my favorite how-to guides, and I really like Gil Damero's book about chicken health. It's the Chicken
Yeah.
Health Handbook,
Yeah.
um, because we were talking about this before the video started. But if you come to fall in love with your flock, as I have, you may eventually want to take them to the vet when something goes wrong, and you might get lucky. Here in Portland, we have a wonderful
Yeah.
chicken vet, but that is not true in a lot of places. And so knowing what to look for ahead of time and being able to stop problems before they
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
bigger is so helpful. So I think having a general overview of things like bumblefoot,
Yeah.
parasites, and what to look for, how to know if something like that is happening will really potentially save you a lot of heartache and trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that for me is still the hardest thing is that going into it knowing that you're gonna have to be a little bit more independent
Yeah.
than you would say with a dog or a cat. That
Hmm.
even if you're lucky enough to live in a place that has a vet like Tova and I do, um, they're probably the only ones, and you're probably not going to get in for 3 weeks or 2 weeks or a while. And so you definitely have to be a little bit more independent and willing to kind of go find your own information and
Hmm.
be a little bit brave and try
Yeah.
to take care of them on your own,
Yeah.
which is not something that we're conditioned to do anymore, I think. We've kind of ceded that over. um yeah, I think back on the farm in the day, you had somebody with an infection or whatever and you worked on it yourself, but we
Yeah.
don't do that as much anymore. And I think it does um also you won't the chickens won't pay their rent.
No, they don't.
They'll look
Uh,
at you and squawk and they'll be very kind and they'll jump on you, but they will not pay their rent. So yes, you will pay way more for them than they will return to you in eggs.
so they do more than my dogs do. So dogs
That's
don't even lay
true. That's
eggs.
a very good point. Yes.
So they all have their
I,
strengths.
exactly. I do go out there and tease them and I'm like, okay, you haven't paid your rent today. Let's go.
Mhm.
Let's see those eggs.
We are currently getting way more than we need. So our
Yeah.
neighbors will be back to getting eggs again soon, which I'm
Oh,
sure they
good.
will be
Yeah.
thrilled about.
Yeah. It
But
definitely
yeah.
goes up and down.
Hmm.
No, the chicken math thing is funny. I was very proud of myself a year ago when I went and got chicks because I was planning to get 8
Hmm.
and I only came home with 9.
Wow.
So I thought I did very, very
Congratulations.
So we are at the point where I would welcome anybody who would like to hop back in and ask any questions. The other thing you can do is put a question in chat. I'm happy to read them. So I'm going to ask while giving people a little bit of time to think about it. Do you have any other projects in the works? Are you thinking now that you've done your first book and wore yourself
Yeah.
out doing your
Yeah.
your release, all your release activities, is doing another book length project something that you're thinking about?
I really loved writing a book. I think working on one project for a really long time made me a much better journalist and writer. It was very nice to do. So I definitely would like to do that again. I have an idea for a nonfiction book, but we'll see if or when that
Yeah,
happens.
yeah,
And it can take a while. It's a little more ambitious. I have to go beyond my own, backyard, even more so for research. But I also really love children's writing, so I would love to do something that's like a picture book or middle grade. So we'll see
Yeah.
what happens first.
Oh, very cool. So somebody popped in and said, would you be willing to share about egg variations you've collected? In other words, have you ever had a double yolker or a fairy egg or a
Yeah,
plastic egg, as I like to call them?
we haven't had anything terrifying like a lash egg, which I'm really excited about.
Yeah.
So look forward to
Yay.
that. Um, but yeah, we definitely have had some double yolks on occasion. They kind of come and go. I love the fairy eggs when they come, and that's when you get like a teeny tiny little egg. And I usually just leave those to dry out. There's one on my counter right now, actually, and my sister-in-law does woodworking, and she carved me this beautiful wooden chicken that's sitting on our windowsill, and then the little tiny egg is right behind it because that's just where it wound up.
Oh,
But it
fun.
looks like the chicken laid the egg, and I love it. So now neither of them can move.
That's very cool. I've definitely gotten the I call them plastic eggs, but they're the shellless eggs. Not
Hmm.
so much anymore, but when they first start laying,
Yeah.
they tend to I got a lot more double yolkers too when they were first starting
Hmm.
laying. They're trying their systems are trying to figure the whole thing out and get going. And so sometimes you
Yeah.
get one without a shell and sometimes you get one with two yolks in it. And I
Hmm.
have gotten a couple fairy eggs, but not too
Yeah.
many of those. So.
Yeah.
Did you either of you have any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I do. I have a comment and a question.
Lovely.
Mostly, I just want to just tell you how delighted I
Aw.
am to have my own copy. I've already purchased multiple copies to give
You're the one
to
buying my book. Thank you.
at least in the Kansas City area. Yes,
Great.
I have called my my independent bookstore that I love
Hmm.
and have like, okay, I needed to order another one. Okay, another one because I just remembered someone else I need to give it to. So,
Thank you.
and I keep, it's just sitting here. I'm like, oh, and I need to get one for these other people. But
Hmm.
so I love the book. The cover is gorgeous. The
Yeah.
title, just I love the title so much.
Thank you.
And so I think getting to my question, as a journalist, you mentioned, doing lots of research and stuff. And I
Mhm.
was just wondering if you had come across any, I know you said there isn't really a book like this, but if there's either if you've come across other books or, and you kind of mentioned poetry too,
Mhm.
or movies or
Mhm.
documentaries, anything that you think that someone who loves backyard chickens might also enjoy.
Mhm. Yeah, that's such a great question. There's a lot that's great in the kid space, and I have a whole little
Mhm.
thing on my
Yeah.
Instagram with of chicken reads, and I think a lot of that tends to be kids. So if you know like young people that are anywhere from picture book through middle grade, there are a lot of great options there. The documentary Chicken People, if you haven't seen it, is delightful. I tell everyone in the world about it. I think that's probably the only good chicken like media that really scratches that itch right now. Though people keep telling me to watch Rockadoodle, which I haven't gotten around to yet, but I think there might be more out there and I've just been too busy. Um, but I also really love in other genres. There's this wonderful little book. I believe it's by a South Korean writer, and it translated very famous. But The Hen Who Dreamed She Could Fly, and it's kind of a fairy tale almost, that is just from the perspective of a hen who really wants to hatch out her own eggs. And it's just like this beautiful short book. And I loved that so much. And then a slight variation on that, Jackie Polson wrote this great book last year called Brood, that is, kind of about a woman struggling with her desire to have children, but a lot of it is told through her looking at these chickens that she has in her backyard. And I'm going to be doing an event with her in Minneapolis, which I'm
Oh,
really excited
fun.
about. So that'll be a lot of fun. So yeah, those are probably the two that come to mind that are in other genres. There is some other great nonfiction out there, but
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to like make a little roundup sometime and
Yeah.
put it in my
I
newsletter.
think Cy Montgomery has a chicken book, but it's an older one.
Birdology has a chapter on
Yeah.
chickens, and I love
Yeah.
Cy Montgomery. Just
Yeah.
everything she writes is amazing. So,
I just thought of a children's book. I used to have a preschool and the chickens were a
okay.
part of our preschool. And so I have all these children's
Oh,
books.
fun.
But have you read, there's a children's book called Peggy about a hen?
Oh,
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I just
that sounds
put two and
great.
two together. But it's about a hen named Peggy who wants to go see the city. And so
Okay.
she goes on this adventure.
Oh,
Anyway, yeah.
that-
It just kind of dawned on me. I had tons of children's books about chickens. There's a really good one. I can't remember the name of it, but it also deals with loss of life, and it does
Mm,
a really nice job. If you have children, you
okay.
have like having hens and what happens
Yeah.
at times and navigating that in developmentally appropriate ways. Anyway.
Mhm. Lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll have to check out your list of children's books too. I'm
Yeah.
also like
Yeah.
a huge book fanatic, but my
Mhm.
mom was a children's librarian, so
Okay.
children's books are, a big part of that too. And actually I was gonna just tag on to your comment about the chicken health handbook.
Mhm.
I came across a used copy of that in a bookstore and of course bought it. And
Mhm.
I refer to that, and I think my copy is so old. I think it was published in like maybe the late 80s. I'm not exactly
Yeah.
sure.
Mhm.
And I use that book more as a reference, because
Yeah.
of course I need a reference.
Mhm.
I have two like official chicken textbooks, chicken medical textbooks.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say too much as far as like a little bit of a disappointment, but I definitely refer to the chicken health handbook more than my medical textbooks.
Yeah.
It's much more.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you got something out of my chapter on chicken veterinary care and the history with that. But I thought it was so interesting when Dr. Littner told me that, a lot of the problem with commercial care is it's based on necropsy, and so you kill the chicken and you figure out what's wrong with it, and it's like, yeah, I would like to have my chicken back at the end. So
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
taking away that diagnostic tool really changes a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I have to confess, I haven't actually read it yet because I've been so busy buying it for other people that I haven't had a chance to read it.
Well, there's a
But,
chapter on chicken veterinary care,
there's
so
a
There you
chapter
get
go.
on
excited. Yeah.
and just sitting here talking about chickens, like it reminds me of all these, like I could go, not that I'm going to, but I could go on about just like chicken little miracle stories of these
Yeah.
chickens that, got attacked by a dog and then I suture them up
Yeah.
and they lay an egg the next day, like nothing happened, like they're just,
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
so tough.
Yeah.
They're just
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Anybody
Lots of
have
fun.
any other questions for Tove?
I will share, much like JC, I bought your book, I read it.
Mhm.
And I have like all these pages earmarked. And then right now I'm raising chicks for myself and for my aunt and uncle, and they were headed on a trip. I'm like, you have to take this book with you on the trip. And when you get back from the trip, you have to give it back to me so that I can give it to my mom. So I just loved your book. And it just seemed like I started raising chickens in Portland, like when the Urban Farm Store was there, and their book was my Bible, the Lit couple. In Portland, Oregon. But this just like had so much more to give. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Yeah.
I should be buying the book for other people rather than passing around my one.
That's fine too.
Thank you.
So.
That's so lovely. I really appreciate you all coming, and thank you, Tova, for being here tonight.
Yeah,
I really
thank
appreciate
you.
that too. I'm going to be posting this to YouTube later tonight, so if you want to share it with anybody, that would be awesome. If you just go to Vintage Books on YouTube, you should be able to find us, and there's links on our webpage too. So thank you again so much. I guess I have to give a plug that if anybody needs a copy of the book, we do still have some at the bookstore.
Lovely.
So, but thank you again all so much, especially Tova, for being here tonight.
Yeah, thank you all for coming. It was fun to
Good
talk about
night.
chickens, as always.
Yay.
Bye.
Good night,
Enjoyed it.
everybody.
Thank you.